Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. So good to be hanging out with you today. I hope you are well wherever you are. A special shout out to those of you who watch the show as a live replay. More of you watch it as a replay than you do live. So a special shout out to you. It's always good to know that you're chiming in. And today you are going to get a real treat. I'm going to introduce my he is a very special guest, but he's also a very good friend. And I can legitimately say that today. Geoffrey Ashenden is a man who I've known over 20 years, and he's such a good mate. And I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Geoffrey in a moment. But before we do, also, I should throw a shout out to all of those of you who have chimed in live as well. It's good to have you here. I just want to remind you that you have officially less than 11 hours to grab your discounted price, 50% off my brand new online course, Dr. Dan's Singer's Starting Guide. And it's a pre-release. Remember, it goes live and we are on target for this. The 4th of April, Monday, the 4th of April, I think it's Monday. It's the 4th of April that we will go live with the brand new course. But for the next 11 hours, you can grab it for 50% off. It will be 197 Australian dollars when it goes live. But actually from 11:59 p.m. tonight. Actually, here's a little secret. So and you will know this because you're watching the show. It'll probably be 97 Australian dollars right up until about sometime around 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, my time. The reason being is I've actually got to wake up tomorrow and change the price. So there's a little hint, a little extra for you who watch the show, for you to know I won't change the price for another 7 hours on top of what is now an 11-hour deadline. So that's 18 hours you've got to grab that special pre-release price. Nearly 50 of you have already done that, which is very exciting, and I'm very humbled that you have entrusted me to grab that. But I want a few more of you to not miss out, so I wanted to let you know. A special shout out. Now, I did see Linda, our wonderful moderator, had not expected to make it to our show today. Well, certainly the start of it, but I can see, Linda, you got here. So it's good to have you join us. And Kathy was going to fill in for Linda. But anyway, both Kathy and Linda are our moderators today for the show. And it's always such a wonderful thing to have such wonderful people taking care of the live chat. And yeah. But anyway, I really want to get into introducing anyway. You'll hear me wax lyrical about this gentleman all afternoon. Let's get to it, and I'll introduce you to him right after this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
Geoffrey.
Hello, how are you?
How are you, good sir?
I'm well, thank you. I was just listening to your introduction. 20 years, my goodness, we must have been children when we met.
I think I was.
What are you saying?
You're a little ahead of me. You're a little ahead of me.
I think I've got about a decade on you.
Well, I wasn't going to say, but mate, it's so good to have you on the show. And
it's a delight to be here.
And as I said, to you in the pre-show, I am actually a little embarrassed to you, not necessarily to anyone else, but to you, that I haven't had you on the show prior to this because you could be left thinking that my notion that we are good mates is more just, you know, verbal diarrhea than actually being a reality, because I haven't had you on the show prior to this, but I'm so pleased that you accepted my invitation.
The quality of the friendship, not the frequency of the interaction, that matters.
Unfortunately, that is true. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because if I had my way, the frequency would be far more, regular. But we did get to share a nice bottle of Merlot the other night. That was very nice. It was very nice to catch up, and I think we had thought that we would spend time talking about, you know, the subject of today's show, but I don't think we ever.
I don't think we got anywhere near it.
We didn't, but which I'm not stressed about because I have purposefully. I mean, the thumbnail says tone and technique, which, as you quite rightly pointed out, is intentionally nebulous. Like we
talk for hours.
We can talk on anything around tone and technique for hours. But I just took another note of what the way I titled today's video, and that is rudimentary singing skills. I mean, do we have any more nebulous, you know, commentary than there isn't? Anyway,
it's very broad.
It's so broad. It's probably problematic. Let's kick off. Yep. Besides you being my good friend, let's talk about who are you. For those in the world who don't know Geoffrey, tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, how you got into this thing, because your experience and there's so much to you. So I'll hand it over to you to give us a little bit of an insight into who Geoffrey Ashenden is.
Well, I was just thinking about this because you were talking about in our pre-show stuff about how I got to be where I am, and it's been an interesting road. I suppose there's a few things that have gone into making me what I am. I first started my musical training at tertiary level when I wanted to be a pianist. So I went to the conservatorium in Adelaide in South Australia and studied classical piano and did an honours degree in that. And then after that, I did a diploma in education and qualified as a secondary school teacher in music. So I did that for a couple of years. And in my later years of studying at the university, I got into singing and classical singing and decided that I was going to be more interested in doing that than playing the piano. So started my operatic training and then did a year or so here in Brisbane in Queensland as a young artist with the opera company. So, you know, I had my training as a pianist initially and then in classical singing, and over 20 years or so made a career as a classical singer. But all the time while I was doing that, because there's not a huge amount of work in this country for opera singers, I was doing some teaching as well. So I did quite a bit of supply teaching, you know, relief teaching in schools while I was performing, and started my own private teaching practice as well. So what I do in my private teaching practice here, I'm not performing anymore, is a whole range of things. I teach piano, I teach classical singing, I teach musical theatre. When I was building my private teaching practice, I realised that it's pretty hard to make a full-time living out of teaching classical singing. And I had quite a few people in the community musical theatre area were wanting to, you know, work on their skills. So I thought, well, I better learn about that. So I informally taught myself quite a bit about that, and spent about 16 years doing sessional teaching work in tertiary institutions as well. So in my private practice, I bring some of the experience I had and training as a school teacher. I've also done some training in Kodai methodology, so when it's appropriate, I'll mix that in as well. So, you know, like you, I've got a practice which is pretty broad, and when somebody walks in the studio door, I put on one hat. When someone else comes in next, I take that off and put a different hat on.
Your capacities as a singing teacher, though, I mean, are much broader than mine. And just so everyone knows the level of your piano skills, back when you and I certainly were doing ANATs, and that's how we met. We met, we both found ourselves on the Queensland chapter committee, and to which you were two times president for the Queensland chapter, and we met each other on that committee. And whenever we needed an accompanist, we got Geoffrey. You're no hack when it comes to the keys. Like you are very good. And
Thank you. I'm cheap, but I'm not easy.
you are very good, and it's not just me who says that. You are I remember Mother Henley, who is someone that we both know, a very accomplished soprano, and she would regularly use you as her accompanist, and you're at the top of your game on a number of fronts.
But it's useful, and I have to watch myself when I'm teaching that I don't focus so much on the accompanying and actually focus on the student. So my sight reading is reasonably good enough to be able to do both. And I think it's nice when students have performances and exams and things, I can actually go in and play for them, so they've got a familiar person with them. It helps support them through the whole process, and it keeps my skills up as well.
Yeah, and I mean the thing about your studio, and this is what's always amazed me about your level of teaching, and is two things. Firstly, if I was looking to, let's say I got asked to do because I'm no longer professionally singing outside of my local church any longer myself, but let's say I was asked to do a gig, everyone, if I felt like I needed, and I probably would need some coaching, guess who I would go to here in Brisbane? I would ring Jeff and I'd say, Jeff, can you fit me in? I'm going to need some sessions. Geoffrey would be the man I would go to for some singing lessons. Oh, not at all. It's very well deserved. And the next thing that I wanted to point people to their knowledge about you is, so I think a lot of our viewers know that it can be very difficult to get a singing lesson with Dr. Dan. It can be. I'm fully booked out. But I have a lot of things sitting around that, a YouTube channel and a social media presence, and a lot of people know about what I do. Your studio is jam-packed purely on word of mouth. Like that's
pretty much, yeah.
That's amazing. And that is just how good you are at what you do. I'll stop making you feel uncomfortable, and we'll move into some subject. But I just wanted everyone to know that you're not simply on the show because we're good friends. You are on the show because you're very good. Let's talk to the area that you are very good in, because I think it's important that people also know you are a classical singing teacher / music theatre.
Yeah.
Let's define what you see as the differences between classical and contemporary, and where do you see those lines being drawn?
Oh, that's a very broad question.
Well, that's in keeping. It's in keeping with the broad nature of our discussion today.
Well, classical singing, I suppose, we want to discuss the differences between the genres. Classical singing and musical theatre are both, by their nature, theatrical, and opera particularly, and musical theatre have a narrative through line. So you're talking about communication of a dramatic arc through opera or through song. Contemporary singing and CCM stuff is a little different. It's not my area of expertise, and when I have somebody who wants me to teach them that, I usually refer them to you, actually. So classical singing, I suppose, if you divide it up into the subgenres. I mean, the opera stuff is the theatrical stuff, but then there's all the art song, and that's divided into the various languages and subgenres: German Lieder, in the French melody, English art song. So teaching that does require, reasonable facility with languages as well as a knowledge of style. Teaching opera singers is more about, I suppose, developing the resonance and the tone to a suitable degree and volume level to be able to be heard in a theatre above an orchestra without amplification.
Yeah.
It's interesting with musical theatre. I mean, the resonator setup is slightly different, of course, and there's a much broader range of subgenres within musical theatre. But I have to keep on reminding all of my students that, musical theatre is always mic'd.
Yeah.
So they've always got a microphone because the bands are always mic'd.
Yeah.
But any professional musical theatre audition, you walk into the room, it's acoustic.
Yeah.
So, they still have to be able to make a good, solid rocking noise to be able to, get the gig.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see as being the key technical differences between, so for example, I also teach not a lot of music theatre, but I do teach music theatre, but there's kind of a line that in the delivery of music theatre that I kind of stop at. And what do you see as, where do you think that line is, not necessarily for you, but in general, and what do you see as being the technical differences that determine, whether a person is setting up classically, with classical technique, or whether they're setting up with more the spectrum of contemporary?
That's a tricky one, because musical theatre these days, you've really got to have that whole broad range from the legit classical end through to the contemporary and pop and rock styles as well. So, I think musical theatre people need to be sort of general practitioners, jack of all trades. I think a classical singer has to be very, very good at one particular narrow range of a technical setup, and a purely contemporary singer has to be equally good at a particularly narrow, broad range of a technical setup, whereas musical theatre have to be able to go between, each end and everything in the middle. So I don't think, for example, that a musical theatre singer would be able to sing Glitter and Big A from Candide as well as a professionally trained coloratura soprano, nor would a musical theatre person be able to necessarily sing a heavy rock song as well as a heavy rock singer can, but they've still got to do something in We Will Rock You.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not quite sure that I'm answering your question.
No, it's such a, this is where I guess the challenge of the discussion lands, is that I've often just thought of it as this being this spectrum, and musical theatre singers are often referred to as crossover artists, they do cross training. But I know that, the moment I always have this conversation anywhere online, I'm always directed to, there's a couple of examples on YouTube of singers doing, what appears to be, from absolute, heavy metal all the way through to opera. I've never been fully convinced. I'm not saying they're not real. They're real, but, the capacity to pull off a few lines from an opera right next to the capacity to pull off a few lines from a rock song or even a heavy metal, that's not, you can learn to do that. That's a bit of a trick, if you will, but to actually do that for, an hour and a half, a couple of hours.
Exactly.
That's
to do a whole role in an opera compared to doing a whole set as a rock singer. Very different.
Very, very different. And so I think the challenge around this discussion is always people want to draw our attention to the exceptions.
Yes.
But the exception, like the vast majority of us aren't the exception. The vast majority of us are the rule. You know, we you know, and certainly my career as a singer would be classified as crossover.
Yeah.
I would never, you know, put my hand up and say, yeah, I was a hard rock singer, because I wasn't. But equally, much to Margaret Schindler's and Adele Nisbet's frustration, I didn't go the road of being a Baroque tenor either.
Right.
But hi, Margaret. Hi, Adele. But you know, because I would have had to have dedicated myself to either extreme to be those things.
Right. Yes.
And I was more interested in something that was far more middle of the ground, far more broad. Let's zero in, if we can, on perhaps. Well, I'm going to be very, very pleased with myself now, because I'm actually going to get us to talk about tone and technique.
Okay.
I didn't know how we were going to get there, but we are.
We got there eventually.
We got there. How does tone? Let's first of all talk. Let's talk about technique first.
Okay.
What are the key technical things that differentiate? Let's stay away from that middle ground, because it gets very messy in the middle. Let's talk about, what do you see as the key differences at the ends of the spectrum?
So, you're talking about classical singers and musical theatre singers?
No, classical and contemporary. So,
Right.
and I'm thinking in the realms of alignment, breath management, tension management. Like, what do you see as being the key differences?
Okay. Well, classical singers need to be aligned well, as do musical theatre singers, as do contemporary singers.
Yeah.
So head and neck alignment and body alignment, I think, are very important and foundational things. In my practice, I focus on that quite a bit. I've had a few physical issues in my life with spinal surgery and things, so I'm conscious of that sort of thing, perhaps more than the average bear. But it does have a significant bearing on the resultant tone, of course, that comes out. If you're misaligned, then things aren't going to be working well. Breath management, that's an interesting one. Classical singers, I think, probably require a little bit more airflow than contemporary stuff. I think the contemporary stuff, and particularly when you're getting into the realm of belt and stuff, it actually requires a reduced airflow. The resonator setups are quite different. I think for the classical singers, you need to have a generally low to neutral larynx posture, whereas the contemporary stuff is more neutral.
More neutral, perhaps, to at times heightened, though never held high. Yep.
Yes. Yep. The positioning, I suppose, of the area around the oropharynx, there's a bigger pharyngeal lift and stretch for classical singing, and less so for the musical theatre and belt. Interestingly, I don't think there's a huge amount, I may be wrong, there may be research telling me I'm wrong, a huge difference in tongue positioning, because classical singing is predominantly based on an Italianate model, and the Italianate model has a high tongue position, because spoken Italian is much higher and more forward in the mouth than spoken English. So I think having the tongue forward and free and relatively high in the mouth is pretty similar across both.
Yeah, I would agree. I from my very first lesson with a student, and this is the case in Module 1 of Voice Essentials 1, the online course, I work on an up and forward placed tongue in behind the bottom front teeth. Yep.
My sort of mantra to my students is, if they're looking at themselves singing and they're singing an open mouth vowel, if they can't see their tongue, there's a problem. If there's a gaping black hole, Look out.
It would suggest that the tongue is now sitting on top of the hyoid and we've got issues. Yes.
Indeed.
Yes. Very good. So let's because we'll talk tone in a moment, because obviously there's a big difference in resonant strategies.
Yeah.
Let's come back for people to understand the difference in the breath. I think one of the key differences is found in breath, the way we manage the air, and it's the implication of the breath strategy on the action of the larynx, I think, that is the key determinant. What do you see as being, you referenced higher flow for classical?
Look, I think the main key word, I suspect, is probably balance.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a balance in the amount of flow and subglottic pressure with the amount of compression of the vocal folds for whatever style you're looking at, you're going to be in the right sort of ballpark. And I think we'd had a bit of a chat about this when we were having a glass of wine or two or three the other day, different breath management strategies. And you had to drive home. You don't know what I did afterwards.
I was good.
Good. Different bodies respond, I think, with different strategies. We talked a bit about the accent method breathing technique.
Yeah.
Which gets quite a bit of promotion here in Queensland.
Yes, it does.
And I've done the training in how to teach that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not something I use exclusively for somebody who comes into the studio and has very little kinesthetic awareness and proprioceptive awareness of their body. I might use it to get them to get something happening. But different body shapes work differently. I mean, you were telling me about some research.
Yeah,
the difference between ecto and endomorphic builds.
Yes, yeah, ectomorphic, endomorphic, mesomorphic, which is the different body types. Which just recently on YouTube, someone tried to question that research. Well, knock yourselves out. It's certainly anecdotally what I observe in the studio every day, as I know you do, Geoffrey. There is definitely the different body types definitely manage the air differently. Yeah.
I tend to focus on getting people to be more aware of what's happening, probably from belly button and around the side and down.
Yes.
So my general strategy is to get people to jam a thumb in their belly button and a middle finger below their belt, and then the other hand just below the ribs and the flank there at the what do you call these things? The obliques.
The obliques,
making sure they can see or sense there's some muscular activity when they're making outflow, and some particularly release when they breathe in, so their muscles turn off. Yeah.
But it's all then how we so something we talk about on the channel here a lot is the balance, and that's exactly the word we would use, is as you just said, it's the balance between phonatory threshold pressure and phonatory threshold flow, and it's getting that pressure flow differential in keeping with the discipline that you are working with. And I already know that we agree on this area, is that there is a difference, but in classical to contemporary, in how you manage that differential. Yeah. Well,
classical singers generally, particularly if they're opera singers, they don't do 8 shows a week like a musical theatre person will, because their vocal folds won't survive that. I think they've done research. They've scoped people after they've done a reasonably heavy operatic role, and there is some residual edema just from the fatigue of making that sort of level of noise for that length of time. It requires a day or two to recover. So I suppose the biggest differences I find in teaching in this area would be dealing with female musical theatre people.
Interesting.
working in the difference between their legit classical end and moving into the contemporary and the belt stuff.
Yeah.
Because males, particularly, well, unless you're a countertenor, in classical area, they're mostly dealing in our M1 thick fold stuff.
Yeah.
There's not really much call for falsetto and opera.
No.
There's perhaps a little bit of mixy falsetto stuff in some art song, but not a whole lot. Whereas the female musical theatre singers are having to go from that, similar to a classical setup, into a heavy belt mechanism. So the what we're talking about, that pressure ratio between the airflow and the where the vocal fold's operating is going to be different.
Let's talk to just that little area, if you don't mind, because I'd be really interested to pick your brain for a second.
Yeah.
Because we know that, in classical voice, it is going to be an M1. For those who don't know it, M1, Mode 1, the language of Mode 1, Mode 2 was introduced back in 2009 by some French researchers. It kind of reflects chest voice, head voice, kind of.
Yeah.
For those of you who work in the Thurman and Welch, that's a short and a dominant lower register. Anywho, it's that fuller sound.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about, so most male, as you just said, most male classically trained singers will spend the predominant amount of their time in that chest voice M1 yada yada sound, right?
Yep.
But it's interesting because I'm fairly convinced that there's still a strategy difference, a balance difference between that and a contemporary male singer in the way they are still using their breath and what have you. What do you think? Where do you think that difference lies?
That's tricky because I don't teach it a lot, so I haven't had a lot of call to deal with it.
Yeah.
I think it's more to do with what we talked a bit about before, just the neutral to neutral high larynx posturing, and some modifications to the airflow to get the right balance for the sound you're after, the tone quality you're after in that genre.
Given that we understand that the voice is a non-linear system,
yes,
and this is a good segue. I think we're doing well with segues today. Then we start to think about tonal strategies, resonance strategies, and the fact the back influence of resonance that's happening post-laryngeal work.
Yeah.
I wonder, to what extent are you cognizant of the way you have your students, your classical singers, and we'll continue for a moment talking about male singers if we can, but feel free to talk about the ladies as well. In what impact is what's happening up and above the larynx, so that we've been monitoring our air, managing the balance of that airflow.
Yep.
What strategies are you encouraging with your students to work with up and above post creation of sound?
Well, I think largely it's going to be to do with the manipulation of the vocal tract from there up. Yeah, so the tongue positioning and mouth shape, lip positioning and lip shape.
Yeah.
So for classical singers working up in their upper passaggio area, my understanding is that that's basically keeping the chest voice, for want of a better word, going up past the point where an untrained voice would normally go into falsetto. So equivalent, I suppose, is very similar to what female musical theatre people are doing in their chest voice, taking that up higher.
Yeah.
So for male voices, I think what we tend to focus on is the manipulation of the shape that you make so that you can create the desired quality of voice, which is keeping the same sort of warmth of colour and tone in the lower middle register.
Yeah.
And so that you create a shape, often with a slightly more forward lip shape, depending on the vowel, of course, to create a longer resonator.
Yeah.
And so the perception for the male voice in classical singing up there can be that you feel like there's something different happening at the level of vocal folds, but it's not. It's actually the way the acoustics are working and feeding back into the system that give you that proprioceptive sensation.
Yeah.
Whereas in male contemporary voice, you might be doing a more open and spread mouth shape. Am I right?
We tend to go for a rather, well, I tend to encourage certainly in the not talking extreme high notes here, but in general I work with a relatively neutral jaw position where I'm looking for them to activate an articulatory response that is really active within the mouth. But I think it's almost certainly less wide, if you will, like less cavernous than which in turn gives us a far more, would the right way to describe it be far more narrow in its resonance? Like it's far less full, which gives us a more speech-like narrative quality. And that, I think, is in part why we, as contemporary singers, we have to be really careful with how much subglottal pressure we've created, simply because there is a far greater tendency, or opportunity, I should say, for the back pressure to increase by virtue of the narrowness of that vowel strategy. Did I make sense then?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm glad it made sense to you. I hope it made sense to everyone else.
I mean, look, in classical singing, the focus is often, well, I would say often too much, on the legato and the beautiful sound and the continuity of the noise that's coming out, sometimes at the expense of truth in storytelling and text work. So, I think classical singers can learn a lot from musical theatre singers in terms of storytelling. Some musical theatre singers can learn a bit from classical singers in terms of tone and having good resonance. You mentioned an interesting thing about the articulatory stuff. I think the jaw and the tongue, very important thing to focus on, particularly in foundational technique.
Yes.
I had Margaret Nixon here in Queensland as a teacher many years ago. She was in her 70s, I think, at the time. She was Mad Meg, we used to call her. With a paralysed vocal fold.
For those who don't know, she was a very, very, very well-known singing teacher.
Highly regarded, yes.
Yes, highly regarded, yes.
Founding dean of the Faculty of Music at University of Queensland, Anyway, she used to talk with this Irish brogue, and she'd say, "That's right, now, Geoffrey, just leave it to your tongue. Sing the words to yourself and invite people in to listen." And I'd go, what does that actually mean? And, every now and then I'll hear myself talking to a student and saying something. I go, Margaret's in the room. And, I sort of worked out what she meant by that, which is to just let everything loose here and let the tongue be more active internally.
Yes. This is, that's not just a classical thing. Certainly, I'm regularly encouraging students to demote the activity of their jaw to be a secondary articulator. And so that because I find, and you might want to talk to this, but I find that when someone's jaw is overly active, that the tongue just goes, "Oh, okay, you've got this. I'll just sit back and let you go for it." Whereas if we can, have the jaw be far less, then the tongue becomes far more active. And the thing, Jodie and I, those of you who don't know, Jodie is my wife. Jodie, in our 20-somethings, we used to play a game called Tekken. It was a really old sort of PlayStation, or it might have even been a Nintendo game. Anyway, it was a computer game. And it was one of the only computer games that Jodie would play with me. And in that computer game, Tekken, you had really big fighters, and you had really, and one hit. If you landed a hit with a big fighter, you'd knock the opponent out. It's all over. But then you also had these really little nimble, really very quick and agile characters, and you had to land more punches and kicks to get a knockout, but you could do it, and so it kind of all evened itself out. In many respects, I've often described the jaw as being that big character. It's big and strong. The jaw, the mandibular joint the temporomandibular joint is one of the strongest joints in our body. But it's cumbersome. The jaw is just not meant to waggle away really quickly. Whereas
I try to encourage students to have some independence of their movement of their tongue and their jaw and their larynx. So they need to be able to move any one of those three things without moving the other, and that's really quite a challenge. So some people
very challenging
jaw and tongue unit, but one won't move without the other. Yeah.
But when you get the tongue acting independently, it becomes wonderfully quick and agile and gives you that crispness of diction and articulation that is not only necessary in classical. I'm often saying to my singer-songwriters, hey, I'm loving the tune, but I'm not catching the lyric. And that means you're giving me less than half of the story.
Yes,
because
and it's good that we have access to other professionals and allied health professionals who are able to help with this sort of stuff. Physiotherapists. There's a clinic here in Brisbane called the Headache, Neck and Jaw Clinic, and they have, I think, 4 practices throughout metropolitan Brisbane. And I frequently send clients their way when I see that they have some ongoing jaw and tongue issues. We often in our little siloed worlds in our studio, we can't solve everybody's problems, so it's good to have a network of people to refer to. I've got clicky jaw, as like a lot of people do, and have had some physiotherapy on that myself. And all this stuff is grist to the mill. You use it, your own problem solving with your own body, with your students. So one of my go-tos is to just get people to jam a finger in there between their back teeth, just to isolate the jaw movement and let the tongue do stuff without the jaw moving. That's it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing where I think the confusion gets created is it's acknowledging that there are similarities and beyond similarities, like samenesses between classical and contemporary technique. That is absolutely the case. But there are also differences that determine, better outcomes and for your specific genre. And it's really important that you understand, well, what do you want to sing? And in deciding what you want to sing, to really ensure that you are taking on board the best applicable technique to do that task specific technique, which is something people hear me saying all the time here.
Well, I know I use that phrase a lot myself in my studio, not just for singing teaching, but for piano as well. Task focused thinking. What's my job? What are the skills I need to get myself there? That's also very useful for dealing with performance anxiety. Give yourself something to think about rather than worrying about what you're doing. And and breath strategies are really great for that sort of thing as well. It's interesting that you have to focus on the fine detail and the minutiae of the technique while you're developing. But when it gets to the point of actually doing something, once you've got it into your procedural motoric memory, I think the research is that if you then start to drill down too much into the minutiae of the technique whilst you're doing that thing, the outcome is going to be less successful than if you actually have a outcome focused thought. So what's the sound that I know I need to make, that I recognise, and what are the sensations? Bang, go with that.
Yes.
It's like the golfer teeing off and thinking about which muscle group to use instead of looking at where he wants the ball to go.
Yes. I remember when I was doing my doctoral work, and one of my supervisors, Paul, I was doing my literature review, and which requires reading hundreds of books, literally hundreds of books. The problem is that I really enjoyed that part of the process. I really enjoyed, digging down into the text and the subtext and really picking it apart. And Paul just said to me one day, he said, "Daniel, there comes a point where you've got to start writing the thesis."
You can't just do a download.
Yeah, and it's the same, I think, with our technical development as singers. Is yes. People who watch my show regularly and are part of the Voice Essentials community know how passionate I am about technique. I love technique.
Yes.
But the reason we do the technique is so we can sing.
So you've got the tools to do the singing.
So that we can do the singing. Yes. And because there comes a time when it's time to sing. And
that's right.
All of this discussion that we've had today and in previous shows and in the shows to come, it's all about you developing your singing of songs, your ability to communicate freely with the voice.
And so you can sing joyfully.
Joyfully. I love it. And remember I said pre-show that we'd get to a point and I'd look down and I'd see the time and I'd go, oh, we're out of time.
We've only just started. What do you mean?
I know. But do you know what? To our credit, Geoff, we did pretty well on both the tone and technique and rudimentary singing skills. We delivered on what we promised.
Money back guarantee. There you go.
No, don't make that promise. Mate, thank you for coming on the show, and
My pleasure.
and I sincerely do apologize for not having you on years ago. But this let's I will make the commitment to you. I'm not going to expect the commitment back, but I will make the commitment to you that this will not be the last time you're invited onto the show.
Thank you. And, just have to bear in mind that the world might not have been ready for us up until now.
Let's run with that. That makes me look and feel a lot better than I probably should. Mate, do you have any final thoughts or comments that you would like to share with us before we catch up with you again?
No, it's been great talking to you, and thank you for the opportunity. And to everybody out there in YouTube land, keep on singing. Keep on singing. Well, I did promise that you would be in for a treat, and you were, and because Geoff just, and we have literally scratched the surface of what Geoff's skills and expertise and the level of his experience is. And so I make this commitment to you, as long as he says yes, I will ask Geoffrey back to join us again in the future. And in part because that will almost certainly require me to go over to his house and share in a few more glasses of wine. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please remember, now if you have not yet grabbed your discount, you've got 18 hours? No, it'll be less than that, but we're down to nearly 17 hours to grab your special. So it will be, officially it ends at 11:59 tonight, but as I said, I won't change the price over until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. So you want to get in now and secure that $100 off. It's half price. And that course, the Dr. Dan Singer's Starting Guide, it goes into so much depth around the very subjects we've been talking about today, but
we really deep dive into the nitty-gritty anatomy and voice care and warm-ups and all of that. There is so much in this new course. I'm really excited to get it to you in April. But if you want it a little cheaper than the rest, then now's the time to do that. Please hit the subscribe button so that you get reminded when we go live. We do these every Monday, 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And next week we'll be doing a Q&A. So rock up with your questions, and I do my humble best to answer your questions. And we do a pretty good job generally. And so I'm looking forward to hanging out with you very soon, when you'll always hear me finish every show with "I'm Dr. Dan, sing well."